South America. So this is what we're talking about today is South America. This is Machu Picchu, and we're going to talk about that in the notes, but it's a pretty sweet looking place. I would absolutely love to go there. But this is what we're talking about today is South America. Okay, so South America is an entire continent. It's its own continent. It's not a part of North America. It's not in the Caribbean. It's its own thing. This is like a political map of South America, so you can see all the different countries that are in here. And South America is a really interesting place because there's a lot of diversity, a lot of differences on this entire continent. For example, in Brazil here, this was colonized by the Portuguese, so they speak Portuguese in Brazil. They don't speak Spanish. And then this area, they all speak Spanish. And then up here, you have French Guiana, Trinidad Tobago, Guyana, and Suriname. And they speak French in a lot of these because this was colonized by the French. And then Trinidad and Tobago, they actually speak French as well as Dutch. So it's really interesting. There's a lot of differences. Okay, so more than 387 million people live in South America. That's about 50 million more people than the United States has. So there's a lot of people that live in South America. Spanish and Portuguese colonized most of South America. The French colonized the Northeast region. I kind of discussed that in the previous slide. And then the Chinese and Japanese, there is Chinese and Japanese ethnic people that live in Peru, Brazil, and Argentina. I'm going to just go back really quick to show you what I'm talking about here. Over here on Peru, Chile, and Ecuador, there is actually a large, I mean, it's not huge, but there are Asian ethnic people that live in this part of South America because they were trading and they ended up just staying and they ended up living there. A lot of Chinese and Japanese immigrants left China and Japan to go to South America to get jobs working on railroads and other jobs. So it's pretty interesting. Brain drain is something that we kind of talk about in this. This is what happens in South America. It happens a lot in Africa, in the Middle East as well. Brain drain is where you have a lack of skilled workers. And now I know when you see that, you think, wow, that's kind of mean. You're saying they're like not smart. They don't have the skills to do certain jobs. That's actually, it's the opposite. What it is they have people that are extremely qualified and are very, very smart, very intelligent, and they're very, very good at what they do. You know, lawyers, doctors, engineers, all of that. But the problem is that they can't get paid as much in South America or in Africa or in the Middle East. So what they do is they immigrate, they leave, and they go to Europe, they go to the United States, and they get paid more to do the exact same job. So think a good example of this is think of doctors. How often have you gone to a doctor and the doctor, his name, it doesn't seem American. It seems like he's from somewhere else. Like, for example, like my family doctor, his name's Dr. Sam Juan, and he is from the Philippines. And he was a doctor in the Philippines, but he left the Philippines to come to the United States to be a doctor because he could get paid more to do the exact same job. You would do the same thing too. So we call that brain drain because what happens is all those qualified people leave, and then in the country that they left, they have a lot of professionals that are leaving, so they can't replace them as quickly, and so they have a lack of skilled workers in those areas. Okay, the coast is heavily populated, and the population density is 45 people per square mile. Okay, so urban areas, they have some big cities in South America. 80% of the population of South America lives in cities, so it's extremely urbanized. Sao Paulo, Brazil, this is the third largest city in the world. It's got close to 20 million people living in it. Buenos Aires, which is in Argentina, and then Rio de Janeiro, oftentimes it's just called Rio, and it's in Brazil as well. It's the 16th largest city, and it is the largest carnival celebration in the world. You've also probably seen pictures of the Redeemer. It's this big statue of Jesus on top of this mountain that overlooks Rio, and you can hike up. There's stairs up here, and so you park your car at the bottom, and you get on a tram, and the tram like takes you up on a cable car up the mountain, and it stops, and then you walk up the rest, and you can actually go up here and see the Redeemer, which is pretty cool. It's a popular tourist site. There's a presence of favelas or slums. Anytime that you have a really high urbanization rate, 80%, that means that there's going to be limited housing. And so a lot of people, kind of like we were talking about the other day in our notes, with the shanty towns, same idea. But the difference is South America is a lot more mountainous and hilly. And so the favelas are usually built into the side of these hills or in these mountains. And so you can see here that they're built kind of on stilts and they're built up above. So like there would be a street down here and then there's like little alleyways that go through here, but you have to walk through these alleyways to get up to these houses. Now the thing that's really kind of sad is that these favelas oftentimes are built not very well and they're incredibly dangerous. For example, imagine if this house, let me turn my point on. Imagine if this house right here caught fire. They don't have running water. So it's not like they can just like hook up a hose to a fire hydrant and put out that fire at that house. There's a fire, it's going to burn all these houses. And so because of that, they can be extremely dangerous. They don't have plumbing. So think about the bathroom situation. You know, that they're using like a chamber pot, which means like they're using a bucket and they have to carry the bucket down and dump it into a sewer. Um, or oftentimes, if it's just number one, it's just pee, they'll throw it out the window into the alley. And it can be very dangerous. You have a big prevalence of bacteria and viruses, and it's very unsanitary and unsafe. They don't know any better. They don't have any other option, really. And so the number one problem in South America is overpopulation, if you could guess it. Um, Being too overpopulated creates a whole lot of problems. Shortage of resources, shortage of water, an overabundance of waste like uh, garbage, but also like human waste, right? Like sewage, and then lack of jobs, lack of housing. So overpopulation can be a really damning problem for a lot of countries. And in South America, it's the number one problem that they have. And you'll see this as we go throughout geography. You'll see us talk about other parts of the world where overpopulation is the biggest problem in a lot of parts of the world. Okay, so moving on to the history. Um, so we're going to talk about the Incas. This is the third Native American group we've talked about in Latin America. We talked about the Mayans, we talked about the Aztecs, now we're talking about the Inca. They were incredibly skilled engineers, far beyond their time with their level of precision and their design. They would take big blocks of stone and they would carve them out and they would be perfectly level. Like the blocks would be level, they'd be perfectly square or trapezoid shape. And it's like they had a machine or something that was just cutting these things out, but they didn't. They didn't even have modern tools. Um, for example, we'll talk about Machu Picchu at the end, but they're able to build like entire walls and buildings and cities on top of these huge mountains. And it's like, how did they get those big blocks of stone up there? They weigh thousands of pounds. They didn't even have the wheel, right? Like it's pretty remarkable what they were able to do. So Cusco was the capital of the Incan Empire. They used terrace farming, which we've seen before. So you take a hillside and you carve it into steps. So that way you can farm on the flat areas. Okay. They used quipas, which are knotted ropes. That's what these are right here. And these quipas were used for inventory. So each color would represent something different. So like orange might represent, bags of rice, while pink represents, bundles of barley, while purple represents the number of, cups that you have or pots or whatever. And so when they would trade, they would also trade the quipas so that way they could put it on their quipa and keep track of the inventory of what they owned and what they had, which was very smart. They had an abundance of silver and gold. This was their downfall. This is why the Portuguese invaded them, because they found out that the Incas had a lot of silver and gold. The Incas used, towards the end of their empire, they started using coins, and the Portuguese were like, whoa, you guys got silver and gold coins. That means you guys have a lot of silver and gold. And unfortunately, the Portuguese said, we're taking over because you want all your gold and silver. And so they were conquered by Francisco Pizarro. He was a conquistador from Portugal. And same deal as Columbus. He went in and a lot of the destruction that the Portuguese caused was through the spread of smallpox. It also started slavery, and ultimately they ended up just enslaving or murdering most of the Incas, and they disappeared because of the Portuguese colonizing that part of South America. They have a history of dictatorships in South America, um, and the problem with that is when Cuba went communist, the idea of having a totalitarian communist regime kind of spread into South America. And so, like, this is Chavez, and he was known as a socialist dictator. He killed hundreds of thousands of his own people, um, very brutal dictator, and ultimately was overthrown. But now in Venezuela, they have a new dictator, and he worked for, his name was Maduro, and he worked for Chavez. And so, unfortunately, in Venezuela, they're dealing with, they have a democracy, they vote, but their elections are rigged. So even if you vote, it'll be like 85% of the people voted for Maduro, and 85% of the people did not vote for Maduro. It's just he is rigging the elections to make it appear they have a democracy, but in all reality, they have a dictatorship. But now many countries are now democratic and have democratic elections where they vote. And South America has become a whole lot more free in the past 40 years than they were in the previous 40 years. Okay, culture. So they speak Spanish and Portuguese. Um, Roman Catholicism is the most popular religion thanks to the Portuguese and the Spanish who brought it through that process of colonization. Um, there are people who practice Santeria, which is a form of religion that believes in spirits. Education and healthcare, stable countries that have democratic elections, a stable economy will have good public education. Um, Countries that don't have free and democratic elections and have very unstable economies have little to no education. So Venezuela, for example, they have very, very bad public education because people are just worried about where their next meal is coming from, and so they don't have time to figure out, how to get the kids to school or to send kids to school because they feel it's too dangerous. Um, Health concerns are linked to poverty. So anytime you have people living in poverty, those people tend to have elevated health concerns, health risks. Um, and so education and healthcare, like we kind of discussed the other day, it's considered a luxury in many countries. A lot of people consider going to school and learning how to read and learning how to do math and learning how to learn is a luxury. They view it as like owning a mansion or owning a Ferrari. Like it'd be nice to have. I could only dream about having that or being able to do that. They don't look at it and go, I have to do that. It's required of me. They don't view it that way. So, people who do come from this part of the world, I've had students in the past who have moved from South America to the United States. They're usually really good students. And the reason they're good students is because they don't take school for granted. They want to be at school, they want to learn because in their home country that they're from, they aren't able to do that. So they don't take it for granted. So they show up to school every day like they're going to work and they're prepared and ready to learn. And they're like a sponge. They just want to soak everything up. Even if they don't even speak English, they still come in, they learn the language really quickly, and they start excelling pretty quickly. And I've had probably over 10 students who come from South America, and all 10 of them ended up being phenomenal students and I think the reason is because of this, because it's viewed as a luxury. So it's like they've been handed the keys to a Ferrari, they're going to drive it. So very, very interesting. Okay, art. So South America and the ancient part of the Incan Empire, they would do a lot of weaving and metalwork. Colombia, they had pan pipes. These would be made out of like a copper or brass material, and you could the various lengths of tube. When you would blow into it, would create a different pitch, and so you could play the pan pipes like an instrument because it actually changed pitch and tonality. Music styles that are popular from South America that they created is samba and the tango. They're also dances, but they're more of a style of music as well. And then family, life, and leisure, like what's popular there. So most families are nuclear families. The idea of the nuclear family is mom, dad, mom and dad have kids, the whole family's together. Um, so there's very, very, very low divorce rates. Also, most people do not have children until they're married. People tend to get married at a younger age there. It's legal to be married at 16 because a lot of people, like their schooling, they don't finish school. They don't go 13 years of school like we do in the States. So once they get into middle school, that might be the end of their education. They start working, and when they start working, they meet people and they get married, and then they have kids. So they have really low divorce rates, really high marriage rate, and so they have a lot of nuclear families. Football, or I'm sorry, soccer, as we call it in the United States. The rest of the world calls it football. Football is the number one sport in South America. It is the most popular sport. In Argentina, and Brazil, and just all across South America, it's rampant. So like each country has their own national team, but then they also have their own professional leagues. Um, and a lot of the really good players from South America, they leave and they go to Europe and they play in the European League, or they'll play in the Premier League in the United Kingdom. But most of them go to the European League and they're playing for like Real Madrid or Barcelona. Um, they play for really, really big, like Lionel Messi. He's from Argentina. He's probably one of the best soccer players in the world, unless you're a Cristiano Ronaldo fan. But football is very popular there. It's like larger than life. Also, beach lifestyle, because they live in an area where they have lots of beaches. So a lot of the sports that you would associate with like beaches are also popular. So like surfing is incredibly popular, beach volleyball, windsurfing, skimboarding, swimming in general, like professional swimming, diving, all that stuff's really popular as well. So if you like watch the Olympics, you'll see that a lot of the kind of like Brazil is always super competitive at the Summer Olympics because, well, it's pretty much summer there almost year round. So they have a lot of practice at those sports. Okay. And then this is Machu Picchu. And remember, I was telling you about the Inca, how they're really good engineers. Look at this wall. Just look at this. Like, I know all these blocks aren't the same, but like, look at these joints. Do you see this? You can't even fit a credit card in there, probably. Okay. And they cut all this by hand with like a chisel and a hammer. And they made it like that. Now, the thing that's really cool about this is kind of nerdy, but whatever. So Machu Picchu, they have lots of earthquakes in these mountains, okay? Because it sits right on top of a fault line of a major plate. So when the Incas built this, they knew that they had lots of earthquakes. So in between these blocks, there's no mortar. So there's no like concrete or cement or mortar, like some type of like a semi-solid liquid thing that you would put kind of glue the blocks together. Because if they glued the blocks together and then you had an earthquake, it just fall over. It just go or break apart, right? But because these blocks were cut by hand to sit pieced together, when it would shake, these blocks would also shake in place, but they would never break apart because of the weight. And so they would always shake together and they wouldn't fall over. So like Machu Picchu, they built 2,000 years ago, 1,500 years ago. It's still there. Like you can go and visit it. Like they just paved Broadway like last year, and there's already like craters the size of the moon on it, right? But the Incas could build an entire city on top of a mountain in a predominantly affected earthquake area on a huge fault, and the city still exists. I just find it incredibly fascinating. Okay, that's it. Thank you for watching. Bye.